Hi everyone, I'm about to go harvest some tomatoes, and instead of doing like a typical harvest video today, I figured what I would do is I would try and get at least one tomato of each variety that I'm growing right now, at least the ones that are still alive, and I'm going to cut them all open and do a little taste test so that I can kind of describe each of the varieties. I know that tomatoes are, you can probably hear Iris screaming her head off right now. She's been like going through this thing where she really screams at us for attention, and we're trying to train her to not do that. So I have to be strong and ignore her, but yeah, you might hear some like wailing. It's not a child, it's our goat. Yeah, so anyway, I know that tomatoes are one thing that people really like to try, like different varieties, and there's so many varieties of tomatoes out there that it's hard to pick and choose which ones you want to have for your garden. So hopefully doing this taste test will be really helpful for those of you who might be interested in some of the varieties that we're growing here. And it would also be helpful for me, to be honest, because then I can really sit down and taste each of these tomatoes in their purest form, because usually I'm like cooking with tomatoes or putting them in other stuff, so maybe having them with other things will kind of like affect what I think of them. And I also feel like sometimes we all kind of like get into our heads about like how we feel about a certain thing. So maybe we formed opinions on things a few years ago and those opinions have changed, whether that's because of finding better varieties or maybe just because our tastes have changed. So I think it's nice to just have a little like recalibration of my own of like what I think of all these tomatoes. So I think it's going to be really fun. And honestly, we don't really grow that many tomato varieties around here because lately I've been really concentrating on like production tomatoes so that I can preserve them. So half of my tomatoes are Roma tomatoes, and I also really like production tomatoes for canning. But we do still grow heirlooms for sure, and I have a few out there that I'm going to pick. Some of our heirlooms have died at this point because that's just what heirlooms do for us. They are not the most disease resistant, so they're usually done by like August or maybe even July, some of them. But I'll pick whatever is still out there. So here are the varieties I have out there off the top of my head. I have BHN 1021, Celebrity, Roma, Purple Russian, Pink Bumblebee, Sungold. I think the red cherry tomato I'm growing is Jasper, but I'm going to have to look that up to make sure. Artisan Blush, and Arkansas Traveler. So what is that? Maybe like 10 varieties? I'm going to try and get at least one of each of them, and then I'm going to come meet you back here. I'm going to slice all the tomatoes open so you can see what they look like on the inside too, because that's also really important. I've learned that the texture of tomatoes is just as important as the flavor, if not more important, because that affects how they cook and how they preserve and all that stuff. So yeah, let me go pick the tomatoes and then I will meet you back here afterwards. Okay, this is what I have for now, and I think I have one of everything, so I'm gonna go inside and cut these open because there are too many bugs out here, and then we'll see how they look. Okay, so here we are, all of the tomatoes have been cut up. I guess I'll go ahead and start taste testing them. I'm not even gonna put any salt or anything. I'm just gonna eat them plain so that I can really taste the flavors. And I guess I'll start with the smallest ones before I do. Here's my beautiful platter of tomatoes. It's pretty fun with all of the different colors and shapes. I'm gonna start with the Jasper cherry. I did cut them open, but for the cherry tomatoes, I'm just gonna like pop them in my mouth because that's how I would eat them. But let me show you how it looks inside. I think those are really good. Tastes like a standard red cherry tomato, so I don't know how much there is to say about it, but it's a nice balance of like acidic and sweet. The skin isn't too thick, which is nice. I don't like when the skins of like smaller tomatoes are pretty thick because usually you're just popping those into your mouth, and if there's a thick skin, that's not really that pleasant. So I definitely like that one. The production on that one has been really good as well. Next I have a Sungold tomato. These ones look pretty juicy inside. There's a lot of like the seed gel portion. Those ones are definitely a lot brighter than the red cherry tomato. They have almost like a citrusy taste. They are very, very sweet, but at the same time also very acidic. It's definitely a strong flavor. They're a great snacking tomato. I don't love them for cooking just because the flavor is so sweet and so strong. It can kind of like overpower something even if you want like tomato flavor. I find that these are better just for snacking. I've also tried dehydrating them and they just get like way too concentrated. So those are best, I think, for snacking. I feel like in the past few years we haven't been as much into like snacking tomatoes though, so I might not grow those next year just because they're not the best to preserve in my opinion. If you really like eating tomatoes fresh from the garden, you'll probably really like that. Also, if you really like very sweet tomatoes, but I think that in the past few years I've kind of gotten away from like super sweet tomatoes. I more want tomatoes that have a more like nuanced, complicated flavor, and I prefer something that's a little bit more mellow and still has tomato flavor and acidity but is not like super sweet because I don't really want to be eating like candy in the form of tomatoes. That's just not my personal preference. Okay, next I'm gonna try the pink Bumblebee. Here's what it looks like on the inside, and again these ones have a lot of like the seed gel area inside. I find that smaller tomatoes often do have that, and that's why they're so like juicy and they kind of like burst in your mouth. These ones I am gonna eat the halved one instead of the whole one because usually these ones I either cut or you have to have them in 2 bites because they are quite a bit bigger. Like here's the pink Bumblebee next to the Sungold. It's like 3 or 4 times the size. Those are so good. I think they're like my favorite smaller-ish tomato that we've grown in the last few years. They're definitely not as acidic as the other two, the Jasper and the Sungold. This one definitely is mellow, so if you don't like acidic tomatoes, you might like this one. The skin is a little bit on the thick side. I don't really mind that because again, I do usually cut these into either halves or quarters when we eat them, so the skin doesn't really bother me, but if you just want to like pop them into your mouth, you might not like that. I really enjoy the flavor of these. If it's been raining a lot, I feel like I really get like the floral notes out of these tomatoes. It's been a little dry here, so right now the flavors are a little bit more concentrated, so it tastes a little bit more like a red cherry tomato, but definitely like kind of like toned down with some nuances in there. I would highly recommend that one, and it also produces really well for us. Okay, next I have the Artisan Blush tomato. This one is kind of like an oblong, almost like a mini Roma or plum-shaped tomato. I feel like it kind of has like the same texture too, where there's more flesh and less of that like seed gel, so it's a little less juicy but more meaty. This one also is like citrusy but also acidic, so it's kind of like the Sungold, but the sweetness doesn't really like punch you in the face. It's toned back a little bit, and they're meatier as well. So I really like those. The flavor is not as strong for sure, and I do find that these ones don't produce the best and they tend to crack a lot as well. So I do enjoy them, and they're also really pretty. I only have one to show you, but they kind of have this like streaking of like yellow, orange, and pink. They're so pretty. I also have to mention the pink Bumblebees are also really, really pretty. They have so many colors in them. So those are just like really fun to grow, whereas like the Sungold and the Jasper, they're just like solid colors, which are perfectly fine too, but they don't really catch your attention the way the other two do. So if pretty tomatoes are your thing, the pink Bumblebee and the Artisan Blush are very nice, and I feel like they'll add like a really nice assortment if you have like a basket of cherry tomatoes. They'll really mix it up a little bit. All right, so next I have a Roma tomato, and Roma tomatoes typically have more of like meatiness to them versus like the seed gel, and that's supposed to make them better for sauces. But I don't know, I feel like as I've grown them this year, I feel like they still have a lot of the seed gel area. So I don't really know if they live up to like what they say they're supposed to do. Like you can see there's a lot of gel in there, which I think the gel is supposed to be the part with the most flavor. So if you're like cooking this down a lot, it might be good. But if you're someone that like sometimes has to scoop out that like gel part, which I sometimes do, like if I'm making salsa and I don't want it to be too watery, sometimes I'll scoop out the seeds, then I feel like you're scooping out a lot of the tomato. The flavor is definitely nothing to write home about. And the texture, it's like a little bit mealy, not juicy. Yeah, I guess there's a reason we don't really eat these tomatoes plain. We usually cook them down because I feel like once you cook them down, it'll concentrate the flavor. Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that like gel to flesh ratio. I feel like there's a lot of gel in there for being a Roma tomato. I don't know, maybe I don't want to grow as many Roma tomatoes. I'm gonna save that one for cooking. It's not that good to eat plain. Okay, moving on to kind of like the larger tomatoes. First I have the Arkansas Traveler, and I'm excited to try this one because I have not had any of these yet. These are the first ones to ripen this year. They're kind of more of a pinky color than a red, I think. Unless I just picked this one too early, but it did seem like it was ready compared to, here's one of my more red tomatoes. You can see how the Arkansas Traveler is a little bit more pinky. Seems like it has a lot of gel area to it. It's okay. It's like very juicy, not that much flavor to it. I do have to mention though that some of these tomatoes are like not like 100% ripe, because I usually pick my tomatoes like 80 to 90% ripeness, and then I'll let them finish ripening on the counter until they're like super red. So maybe that one just needed to be a little bit more ripe, but I don't know, it didn't really have a lot of flavor. It was juicier, so probably better for fresh eating and not as much for preserving. But yeah, that one's a little disappointing. All right, next I have the purple Russian tomato. These ones do definitely have a lot of gel to them typically. I find that they're like some of my juicier tomatoes, so these ones I really do try to just eat fresh. There's so much more flavor in that one than the last two. You can see it's called a purple Russian, but it's like not really all the way purple. It's kind of like a reddish, burgundy, purpley color. And then they usually have a little bit of green as well. They're really pretty. The flavor is like a deeper kind of flavor. It's not an acidic red tomato flavor. It kind of reminds me of like the Paul Robeson. It's almost like a smoky flavor. I really enjoy these. And the texture is not really mealy. It's like not really mealy, but not really firm, kind of like in between. So yeah, I guess there is a good reason why I grow those every year, even though the tomatoes always crack. They just taste really good. They're good for fresh eating. Again, you just have to take into account that they crack and they can be a little bit more watery inside, but the flavor is really good. All right, next I have the BHN 1021, and you can see when I cut this one up, look at how nice and firm the flesh is, and there's so much like nice flesh there. That side is just completely solid. There's a little bit of gel on this side, but I think I've come to realize that's one reason I love this tomato so much, because when you're canning, you're processing your tomatoes for a long time and they can get really soft, and I feel like these ones hold up better without turning to complete mush. And because there is less of the gel, you're getting a lot more of the meat of the tomato versus the juice. Yeah, the seed pockets are just like a lot smaller on these ones. The tomatoes also get to a really good size. Like I cut them into quarters because they're so big, but this was one of my biggest tomatoes. For being only like 75% ripe, that tomato is so good. It's like not even all the way red around. I really thought these were going to be too underripe, but it definitely tastes so much better than the Roma tomato and the Arkansas Traveler. The texture of the tomato is really good. I'm so in love with this tomato. I'm kind of, you know, I think I'm almost out of seeds for these ones, and I can only get them at Johnny's. And I've gone through a whole thing about that, about how I don't want to pay for shipping from Johnny's, but I might have to for these tomatoes. They're so good. The last one is the Celebrity tomato. These are a hybrid determinate just like the BHN 1021, and they look really similar on the outside. They look very similar. So let's see if they taste the same. There is more like gel in this one. Here's a comparison again. You can see the big gel pocket on the left versus the BHN has like almost nothing. I'm gonna try another piece of each just to see if I'm like just picking different parts of the tomato. Yeah, no, I don't think that's it. It's definitely the Celebrity are like juicier. Like this whole thing here is all seed gel. And I bit into another piece of the BHN and it's all flesh. And I think the flavor of the BHN, it has more tomato flavor. The Celebrity is a little more like watery. I don't know, this is news that I kind of did not want to figure out because this means that I have to order more BHN 1021 seeds. They're the best tomato, they really are. So I think in general, I would say that the smaller tomatoes have a lot more flavor, they're more concentrated, they're great for snacking and fresh eating. I'm surprisingly very disappointed in the Roma tomatoes, and I think it's good to test them out fresh like this because typically I just cook my Roma tomatoes and I don't even bother with eating them fresh. But it's really good to know that they don't have as much flavor as I thought they did. They honestly kind of taste like store-bought tomatoes, which is really disappointing. So I'm gonna have to rethink my tomato plants for next year, maybe not include as many of those and like maybe just grow BHN tomatoes because they have so much meat on them that I think that they would make better sauce tomatoes than the Roma tomatoes would even. And then out of the larger tomatoes, obviously the BHN I love, and then the Purple Russian also has a really good flavor. And then Celebrity is like okay, like not the best, but definitely not the worst. The Arkansas Traveler, I was not impressed with. I'm gonna try it again, maybe. I picked a second one and I'm gonna let it ripen a little more on the counter and see if it's better, but as of right now, I'm not super impressed with that. So yeah, some of these results I totally expected and some of them I was very surprised by. So I hope this was helpful. And if you haven't like sat down and taken a bite out of all the tomato varieties you've grown without like messing with them and doing anything to them, I would highly recommend it because you might be surprised by the results and what you find out you do or don't like. Because I definitely was. So yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you again in the next one.